Okay, so what is science? Well, science is simply a perspective. It's a way of looking at the world through empirical observation to make accurate predictions about the world and about the universe. And so because science is based on this empirical observation, it's entirely dependent upon an observer, aka us as human beings. And so we can only interpret the world as human beings through our five senses. And so because of these restrictions, I suppose you could call them, on our perceptions, science is based on various philosophical and logical axioms. Now, first of all, our perception is dependent upon the whole subject-object dichotomy. You always need an observer to observe the thing which is being observed. And science is also dependent upon the laws of maths and the laws of logic, which some people would say are mere abstract concepts. They're not necessarily real, as after all, logic is just a description of the ways in which we think as human beings, and maths is simply a useful way of describing our universe in terms of in terms which we as human beings can understand. And so things like numbers and mathematical equations don't actually exist in an objective outside world or reality, which kind of leads me on to my next point, really, about science being dependent upon the belief that there actually is an external objective world. We assume, or scientists must necessarily assume, that there actually is an objective world which we can observe data which is separate from from ourselves as human beings. And so science must assume that the data which we are perceiving through our senses of the outside world is reliable. We must assume that it's accurate, and it provides us with an accurate picture or description of the outside world. And so because of this, really, science is also dependent upon itself. I mean, in order to observe something scientifically, or to analyze data scientifically, we must use science. We must use the scientific method in order to do so. And so we must use structures and rules which science itself has created in order for us to understand and interpret and validate the world. And so I think really that science, or scientists, need to understand that science is just a perspective. It's a very useful perspective, don't get me wrong, but science cannot be said to present an accurate picture or description of objective reality as it is in itself. It can only provide descriptions and predictions of the world, and how we can understand it, and so on and so forth, through our own human senses. And it's also the case that our scientific beliefs and our scientific methods have changed over time. I mean, for example, the Greek mathematician Euclid, I don't know how you pronounce it. His two-dimensional geometry served a very useful purpose to us as human beings for nearly 2,000 years, until a much better or more accurate way of describing the world was developed. And so the same goes for people like Isaac Newton. I mean, his theories worked and were very useful for hundreds of years, until new truths were discovered. Until Einstein came up with his theory of general relativity, which in some ways destroyed Newton's theories of of motion and things like that. And so science itself is constantly changing and evolving, one might say, due to the needs and and developments of us as human beings. And so because of that, science can only ever provide us with predictions. It cannot say for a fact that anything at all is going to happen, or it can't say that anything must necessarily happen. And this is kind of similar to David Hume's problem of induction, where he says that just because we have observed something occurring, it doesn't necessitate that it will occur again. No matter how many times we have observed it to be the case. And it's like, if we imagine in every single observable case, for example, the sun has risen in the morning, but science cannot tell us with any kind of concrete evidence that this has to be the case, that this must happen. It can only predict that it is extremely likely to happen again, because it has happened in every single past case that we have observed. And so this is why science can only explain how things occur in the world and how things work in the world. It cannot explain why they occur. And it's like science cannot tell us why gravity works. It can only tell us how gravity works, and it can only give us a prediction of what will happen when two masses or two bodies or whatever come together, but it cannot tell us why it happens. If you were to ask a physicist or a scientist or whatever why gravity works, why gravity works the way that it does, then they'll be struggling to give you an answer to that. And same with other things like science can't tell us why the sun revolves around the earth. It can only explain how. And so science can't explain the whys, why things happen. It can only explain how things happen. And so because of this, science cannot be said to be an absolute truth. It's only a perspective or a truth from a human perspective, not in an absolute perspective. And so it's a useful perspective, don't get me wrong. I'm not dissing science or anything. It's a useful perspective which we can use to predict things and predict events in the world and so on, but it cannot provide us with an accurate description of reality itself. And I mean, even people like or even physicists like quantum physicists and so on are even now saying that science, or everything that they thought that they knew about the universe, just gets flipped upside down with that one. And it's making even scientists question what they thought they knew about the universe, or what they thought about reality and how it works, and so on and so forth. So that's that.